Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best and the worst of Vaughan Williams' Symphony Number 5 in D, one of the most gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, transcendental pieces of orchestral music you are ever going to hear. I mean, it is so lovely, but at the same time haunting, and like all of Vaughan Williams' somewhat pastoral sounding or luminous music, there's an undercurrent of darkness and tension that runs through it that keeps it from becoming just boring, first of all. And second of all, that gives the whole thing just immeasurable, bottomless depth of feeling and expression. It is glorious. Now, Vaughan Williams wrote his Fifth Symphony in the right immediate post-war period, around the late 1940s, and right after the extremely turbulent and nasty and Godzilla eats Manchester kind of music of the Fourth Symphony. And when it came out, people thought, oh, well, he was old by then. He was born in the, God knows, when was he born? He was like 1870 something, right? I mean, he was around forever. He knew everybody. 1872. So everyone thought, well, it was his valedictory work. Well, it wasn't, because right after that he came roaring back with the even weirder and stranger and nastier Sixth Symphony. So yeah, it was a fake out. But that's not the point. The symphony has some thematic connections to his opera, The Pilgrim's Progress, which Vaughan Williams was working on for decades and never thought he was going to finish. And so he raided it and took some of the best bits and stuffed them in the symphony. Then he went on and finished the opera shortly thereafter. So it all worked out rather well. But this piece is so marvelous, and it's really unique in his work. It has a very, very particular and interesting orchestration. There's no percussion besides timpani, and the orchestra is small. The brass section is only 2 horns, which the score specifically says are not to be doubled. So it's 2 horns, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones. That's the whole brass section. And the woodwind section is flute and piccolo, and 1 oboe and 1 English horn, which also don't double. And that gives the whole woodwind section a very wide range of brightness on the one hand and plangent, nostalgic darkness sort of on the other hand. It's just an amazing piece. Really, really an amazing piece. And it's been recorded a lot of times, surprisingly. And there are some singleton performances. I was just sitting here to do this talk. I just whipped out 18 versions. And Vaughan Williams, for all that we love him, and he was a great symphonist and a great composer, is still not a household word, in the universe of symphonic composition. And he doesn't come to everyone's notice immediately, like Beethoven, for example. I mean, he's in that second category of great composers. So when you've got 18 recordings, and there are more. This is just the ones that I had sort of sitting around. That really says something. It's something really pretty extraordinary. And so I'm going to go through these 18, and let's talk about quickly how the parameters run. Now, the thing about the Fifth is that it's such a special work in its expression and its tone. I mean, it's hard to ruin. It really kind of plays itself. I mean, there aren't that many bad performances, but there are a couple, which I get to talk about, thank goodness, for contrast. Most performances are very good, and most performances wind up sort of doing the same kind of things, because the structure of the pieces, there's a movement marked preludio, which is in sonata form. It's in straight sonata form. And then there's a scherzo, a short scherzo, and a gorgeous romanzo, which is just one of the most haunting things in the universe. It's in the spirit of Vaughan Williams' pieces like his Tallis Fantasia, and those just gorgeously luminous sort of spiritual kind of pieces. And then a finale, which is a passacaglia, a loose passacaglia. That is the bass theme over which the rest of the music flows, comes and goes. And then it returns to the opening of the first movement to wrap the piece up in utter tranquility and repose. And that's how it goes. But here's the thing. The first movement and the romanza are usually about the same length. That is, they run 10 to 12 minutes. The last movement is, well, it can run 9 to 10 or 11, but it should be on the quicker side because it is a finale. The scherzo is always about 4 to 5 minutes. And virtually every performance that you will hear fits within those parameters. And so in terms of tempo, there isn't a lot of variation from one performance to the next. There is a difference in terms of phrasing and sense of climax and well, it's a hard quality to put your finger on, but I call it luminosity. I mean, it's how the string section plays and how they create texture in all of those beautiful moments that they have. I mean, there's so many of them. You can't even list them all. And they're just haunting. I mean, for example, the second subject of the first movement, you know, the key suddenly changes. It's from D, it changes to like E or something, or one of those other keys. And the strings are playing something, and the woodwinds are going, ya, da, 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 which is sort of the main motto of the whole symphony. And then the strings go, ya, da, 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 da. It's a sudden unison at the top of their range. That can be a moment of such poetic power if it's done right. Or it can just sort of pass by. It's always pretty, but it can just pass by rather perfunctorily. And then there's the opening of the romanza, which is just that sequence of haunting chords for widely spaced strings, rather like the opening I said before of the Tallis Fantasia. And those moments of that silky luminosity, they have to have texture. They really have to sound. They can't be so quiet that you can't hear them. I mean, they've got to really have body and a certain majesty, because the peace and the sort of cosmic quality that they exude doesn't come across if there's no tangibility to the sound. And so there are issues there with sonics and all kinds of things. And those are just two little moments. I mean, there's so many others. There's the big climax at the beginning of the Passacaglia where the brass finally take over and really cut loose, and you hear that wonderful, wonderful big chord, which is between horns and trumpets and then trombones blasting out, almost like the end of Brahms' Second Symphony, that blast on the trombones. You know, moments like that, because the orchestra is small and you know, so carefully chosen, all of those moments really count, and they have to stand out. And some performances get it and some performances don't, but it always sort of works. So it's hard to do it badly. It really is. But let's talk about the people who do. Let's start out with the real bow wows and see where we are. Bow wow number 1, Haitink. The worst performance of Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony ever in the history of humanity. First of all, it is trudgingly slow. It is so flabby and weak and droopy, like all of the performances in this cycle, by the way, which is the most horrible Vaughan Williams cycle ever. The performance is, well, let's just see. You know, timings, of course, never really tell the whole story. I say that very frequently because what matters more is phrasing and accent and stuff like that. And something can be very slow and marvelous. So, I mean, I just heard the Matsalaru Sanson organ symphony, which is very moderate in tempo, but fabulous because it's so rhythmic and so clear and so full of color and differentiated textural layering. Well, this isn't. This has none of those qualities. 0. Well, let me see if I can find it in here. Hang on a minute. I'll get it out of its box if it kills me, and then I'll put it in even faster. Here we are, Symphony number 6. Symphony number 5. Okay, so you got over 13 and a half minutes for the romanza, which is deathly. Absolutely deathly. The scherzo is 5.5. It's just too slow. It should be really 5 or a little bit less. The first movement is over 12.5. That's a little bit on the slow side. It's not fatal, but the finale, 11 minutes and 27 seconds. I mean, it's really like 2 minutes too slow. And in a shortish movement, you know, you can't get away with that stuff. And, you know, the sonics are so-so, and it's just awful, awful, awful. It takes something that should be tranquil but intense and just drains it of all that intensity. So Haitink sucks beyond belief, and we will dismiss him accordingly. Next, for a real shocker, well, this isn't really the conductor's fault. This is the engineering. This is Vernon Handley. Now, this is really a good Vaughan Williams cycle. Handley is a wonderful Vaughan Williams conductor. There shouldn't be anything wrong with it. But this recording, which has Floss Kempe and the oboe concerto, it's a really nice coupling. And I remember when it first came out, and I snagged it because, you know, it was a digital, and it was exciting, and it was a new Vaughan Williams cycle. This was, I think, the first release. And the tempi are all good. I mean, there's nothing bizarre about the performance. Handley never really sets a foot wrong. The problem is that the engineering is so blowsy and lacking in substance, and it has an excessively wide dynamic range. So you have to really crank it up, but when you really crank it up, the loud parts are way too loud, and then you turn it down and it all just dissolves and goes away. It ruins the performance for me, frankly. It's a good performance, but I can't recommend it. Because, you know, I mean, people will get the whole cycle, and it's in the box, you know, the Vaughan Williams edition, the old one. There's a new edition coming. We'll see what's in there. But, oh, I wish they hadn't blown the recording. It really is a tragedy, because it would be a beautiful performance. It really would, but it's very hard to listen to. And so that has to go the way of the world as well. So now we have 16 pretty good ones. And we're going to go through them and get to the like, you know, the best of them. We'll go through them rather quickly, I think, because, like I said, all the Midland ones are similar and similarly good. They really are. I can talk about tiny points of detail, but it's almost, you know, they're tiny points of detail. You may care about them, you may not. It's hard to say. So there was the Hickox cycle. This was also largely a very disappointing cycle. Hickox did so much great stuff for Chandos, fabulous stuff, and wonderful. I mean, Malcolm Arnold and all this really nifty stuff. But his Vaughan Williams was just a disaster. I don't know what went wrong or why he just wasn't into it. That's all I could say. He did great Vaughan Williams choral music. I mean, the 5 Tudor portraits, and, you know. But when he came to the symphonies, he was at C. And this particular version of the Fifth is not too much at C. It's standard, but it isn't special. It does have the London Symphony, which is a good thing because they seem to have a special feel for the work. But we'll get more London symphonies doing this in a minute. And so Hickox, I think, is just, I mean, if you have the cycle, you'll get that, and it's okay. But then we have this interesting one on Dutton Epoch. It comes with this guy, Christopher Wright's 2 works, Momentum and his violin concerto, and then there was Silence, which are interesting works, worth hearing, I think. I really do. The Fifth Symphony is an okay performance. It's conducted by Martin Yates. It's with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. Not terrible, but he doesn't nail the big moments. There's something about his phrasing and his shaping of the way that, you know, the climaxes that, you know, he doesn't give them enough oomph. They sound a little perfunctory to me, frankly. This claims to be, by the way, a new edition of the symphony. I don't know how much they changed to make the edition new. There's a little note in here which says, well, they moved a timpani roll that most people correct anyway because it's an obvious mistake. And there are a couple other things in a couple places. I don't notice much difference, and quite frankly, as in most cases where people diddle, you know, tiny little details, what matters much more than the addition is the performance and the interpretation, which is there. It's not special. Not special at all. Okay, who we have next? Andrew Davis as part of his Vaughan Williams cycle with the BBC Symphony. This is a beautiful performance, beautifully recorded, completely standard tempos. Again, it doesn't have overwhelming personality or ideas, but it's in the idiom. I mean, not everything can be, you know, a work of genius or can give you a totally new slant on the work, especially one as well composed as this one. And so it's a beautiful cycle and a beautiful performance. So that's all I need to say about it. By the way, let me just add you another little tidbit which you may find interesting. Vaughan Williams dedicated the symphony without permission to Sibelius. I don't know why you need permission, but, I mean, it's nice to ask permission. When I did my Sibelius book, because of Vaughan Williams' Fifth, I wanted to dedicate it to Siini Rautavaara, the wife of the great Finnish composer who I've spent some lovely time with and who made me a fabulous lunch one day in Helsinki. And so I asked permission to dedicate the book to her, also because I talked about Rautavaara's music in the Sibelius book. So I got permission. So there you go. Vaughan Williams didn't get permission, but what's the relationship, you may ask yourself? Well, the first movement of this symphony is very, very plainly and heavily influenced by the first movement of Sibelius's Sixth, a piece that almost nobody talks about and people think had no further reach of its, tentacular musical structure, because it was so unique and Sibelian. Who could do anything with it? But Vaughan Williams was obviously inspired. Why? Because the structure of the movement is almost identical to that of Sibelius. I mean, not quite, because Vaughan Williams is in sonata form with two clear subjects, and the Sibelius is just, an organic thing. But it begins very slowly with serene and luminous string polyphony and that kind of transcendental quality. And then there's a very quick middle section, which both of them have. And then the middle section sort of slows down and returns to the mood and music of the opening. And that's exactly what Vaughan Williams' Fifth first movement does. Of course, it does it in its own way, and you can't really directly compare them because, like I said, the Sibelius is so Sibelian-y. I mean, Sibelius combines the two tempos at the end of the movement, and his recapitulation sort of shows how the whole thing is actually proceeded in one tempo, whereas in the Vaughan Williams, there is a slow thematic element and then a quicker development, and then it returns to the slow thing. It's a little bit more block-like in its structure. The Sibelius is more fluid, but the concept is very similar, and those middle sections are very similar, because you may recall in the Sibelius, the violins, the strings are going da 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 da. There's this string figure that the whole string section is doing, and over that there is a little woodwind motive, da 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 da, like that. Right? Well, in the Vaughan Williams, the strings are doing their thing. They have a little different figure, but they're doing their thing. And there is also a little woodwind figure. Da 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 da, that goes through the woodwinds while the strings are going like that. It's so Sibelian. Oh my goodness. So if you want to have a little fun, listen to the first movement of the Sibelius Sixth, and then listen to the first movement of the Vaughan Williams, and you will hear the resemblances immediately. And that's why I think Vaughan Williams dedicated it to Sibelius without permission. I mean, who knows? If he'd asked, Sibelius might have said, "Holy crap, you're filching from my Sixth Symphony, you bastard. I deny you permission." Nah, he wouldn't have done that. But anyway, so that's that. Next, let's see, who else do we have? Oh, yeah. Martin Brabbins. This is part of his Vaughan Williams cycle on Hyperion. And some of these are interesting because of the other stuff that's on the disc. Here you get the symphony in a perfectly lovely performance. This is, again, standard and, right in the groove for this symphony. But you get scenes adapted from Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, 26 minutes of them, which is nice. So you get to hear a bit of the opera where the music from the symphony came from. That's a nice concept, and it makes for a desirable production on the whole. Although the performance of the symphony is perfectly fine, and lovely. And then there's this one, Andrew Mancy with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic on Onyx, part of his new Vaughan Williams cycle. I mean, they just keep coming. I actually like this performance of the Fifth a lot. This is, I think, one of the better new ones. It tends to be a little bit on the quicker side, which I think is good. Vaughan Williams, actually, we have a recording of Vaughan Williams doing this symphony in typically lousy sound, and his tempi tended to be quick. He says in the score that the duration of the work should be about 35 minutes. And very few performances manage to do it in 35 minutes. 38 is more like it. And, like I said, again, timings, well, it depends. But it's interesting to see how people actually do, manage to fit. And Mansi, who is, comes from the period instrument movement and all that, and tends to be a little on the quick side anyway, does a really good job with this. It comes with number 6, as it often does. Also a good performance. And let me see, how does this add up? It's 22, 23 plus 5 is 28. Plus 9, 37, 38. This is 38. And that's a little bit on the quick side, believe it or not. So there you go. Worth seeking out, I think, for this performance. I think it has personality. Now, here's one you probably haven't seen, and it's also quite lovely and perfectly normal. Bingo! Michael Collins, the clarinetist with the Philharmonia Orchestra. Now, this is an interesting coupling because Michael Collins plays and conducts the Finzi Clarinet Concerto, the concerto for clarinet and strings, which is a gorgeous work and one of the great clarinet concertos. And he couples it with a very, very lovely performance of the Vaughan Williams Fifth with a romanza that doesn't drag too badly. I mean, it's actually a little on the other side of the 12-minute mark, which is a good thing. It's beautifully recorded by Biss. He's got the Philharmonia Orchestra. I mean, where did this come from? And why? Who knows? But it's a nice disc. It's one that you're not likely to see. I mean, clarinetists are more likely to focus on this than like other people because of the clarinet concerto. But it really is a lovely disc and well worth considering if you like the coupling. It really depends on the coupling. If you want the Finzi Clarinet Concerto, which you should have, and you should hear because it's very, very lovely, then you get one hell of a bonus in a very fine Vaughan Williams Fifth with the Philharmonia. And Michael Collins does a very good job with it. So that was really fun. A very, very pleasant surprise. And oh, I loved this performance. This is a Telarc with Robert Spano and the Atlanta Symphony. I like any time somebody does Vaughan Williams who is not British, with not British people and not British orchestras, because I really believe in my heart that if you're going to sell the product, if you're really going to make the case for Vaughan Williams being the major 20th century composer and symphonist that he is, I don't think there's any doubt about that, he's got to be played elsewhere. And especially the English musical establishment has to welcome him being played elsewhere. They can't circle the wagons in their traditional old boy network xenophobic mode and say that, oh, well, it can only be done in England because they're the only people who know how to do it, and because, Sir Twibble knew somebody who was friends with the composer, and they did this, and of course the unique sound of the British strings is such that you hear that nonsense. What we want to hear is how wonderful that other people are doing this music and doing it so well and recording it so beautifully. That's what we want to hear coming from those people. Fat chance of that. So I'll do it. Here's a beautiful Vaughan Williams disc. Really, really lovely. First of all, you get the original Tallis Fantasia tune that the Tallis Fantasia is based on. Why fumeth in fight? That's what it's called. Why fumeth, as in fumeth. Why fumeth in fight, the Gentile spied, in fury raising stout. I can actually sing it. I'm not going to. So then you get that. You get the Tallis Fantasia, lovely, beautiful performance. And then the Fifth Symphony in a very, very beautiful performance, very nicely done. And then you get the Serenade to Music in the chamber choir version. Boy, this is a beautiful record. Oh, wow. I mean, the music is just so pretty. It hurts. It's so pretty. As I've said before, about some of these pieces, they're just, it can be too much. You may want to listen to them in parts because you can only handle so much gorgeousness at one time. But yeah, hot stuff. And Telarc, great sound. I mean, if it's still around, it's worth hearing. And it's nice to have other people doing it. Now, here's a very, very pleasant surprise. A beautiful performance that you may have gotten back in the day when Virgin Classics was still around. This is Yehudi Menuhin, and it's coupled with the Concerto for Two Pianos, which is a very different work, but from the same period. So that's a lot of fun. That's a good coupling. I like this performance of the symphony. I really do. I like it because it has great liveliness and musicality to it. I mean, Menuhin was an on-again, off-again conductor, but he did do some wonderful things. And, he was fairly elderly when he came to do this. I mean, I remember when we met him in Cannes for the Cannes Classical Awards, and he was very near the end of his life, and he could barely move. But he was moving here. I mean, this was recorded in, 1988. So it's really good. And, the double piano concerto, the soloists are Markham and Broadway, Ralph Markham and Kenneth Broadway, with the Royal Philharmonic. And it's another fine disc. What can I say about these things? I don't want to, one of the things we critics like to do is jump up and down and make a big deal out of minuscule differences for the sake of the point. So, but I can't exaggerate them when it comes to this piece. It's all just too effective, and it works too well. And the people who are playing the music know it. But there are some more distinctive ones, and they're coming up. And so don't worry. Everything is not just the very good middle. I wouldn't even say the mediocre middle. They're much better than that. They're really good performances. So this will be this one will also, I think, I really like this performance too. It's Keys Buckles on Naxos, coupled with a really good Ninth Symphony as well. This one is 38 minutes and 16 seconds. It's right on target, right where it's supposed to be. And it's with the Bournemouth Symphony. It's beautifully recorded. It's very sensitively performed. And I like this Vaughan Williams cycle too, because Buckles he's not flabby. Let's put it that way. He doesn't let the honeyed orchestral timbres drip and stick. He keeps it moving. And he has good accents. He's punchy where the music needs to be punchy, and he allows he doesn't smooth everything over like some people tend to. And it's a particular risk in this particular piece, which has all the smoothness it needs built right in. You don't need to help it along, Mr. Haitink. And so this is a very beautiful performance and a very good cycle. It's very good. Now this one, well, this was such an on-again, off-again Vaughan Williams cycle. It really was. Bryden Thompson's first one. He only did one. It's on Chandos, and it was... The problem with this one is that it had some really good-sounding ones and some really not-so-good-sounding ones. Chandos's recordings, they could be really together and coherent, or they could be very diffuse and echoey. And this cycle had both. Unfortunately, the Fifth Symphony, happily, is not one of the echoey, blowsy ones. It really is a beautifully engineered performance and a beautifully shaped performance. Let's see, it lasts 38 minutes and 50 seconds. It's right on target, but it really has that luminosity to the string timbres, and it's just a beautiful performance. I really loved it from the minute it came out. I loved listening to it. It falls very gratefully on the ear, and I think that for that reason, it's a pity. I mean, it's in a box now, and I don't know if you can get it separately, but it was always a lovely version. Unfortunately, the sixth that came right after it, not so much. That's what happens. So it's kind of a singleton thing. If you can get it on a streaming service that way, or download it somehow and listen to it that way, give it a shot and see what you think. And see if you agree with me that the sonics are really kind of special. That would, it's a nice thing. Oh, yeah. No, who could forget? Barbaroli did it with the Philharmonia, coupled to Tintagel, which will make all the people on the planet Baxia celebrate. Of course. This is a really lovely performance, too. I think, Barbaroli, I have to say, he does not drip and drool in this particular performance. It's a together performance, and the first movement is particularly cogent, and I was really very pleased with that. I think it's just beautiful. I don't know why people don't talk about this performance more. I really don't. Barbaroli is such a demigod in the British musical, orbit, and this is a kind of symphony you would think he would do really well. Well, maybe not. Maybe because it's not, one of those heavy breathing romantic things like Elgar II or the Mahler stuff or the other things Barbaroli was known for. But the guy had a real gift and taste. We don't usually associate that with Barbaroli in his romantic vein, but he did. And he understood the idiom, and he was friends with the composer, and he knew what he was doing, and it's a lovely fifth. Really beautiful fifth. I think maybe he was a little bit overshadowed by the various Adrian Bolt recordings. That's a possibility because we'll see they're very, very good. So that's that one. Okay. Well, now we have Andre Previn with the Royal Philharmonic, another Royal Philharmonic one. You see the same orchestras popping up. Now, Previn did this 3 times. And one of them came and went so quickly you wouldn't even know it. It was with the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, the conservatory. It was with their orchestra. It was on Warner, on EMI, and it's gone poof. It's just gone. It's disappeared. And then he remade his RCA one with the Royal Philharmonic on Telarc, and he always had a special feel for this piece. He really did. It was a piece of music that sang to him. And the performance is lovely, and it's absolutely the normal pattern of things. It comes with a lovely Tallis Fantasia. Of course, the Spano one on Telarc gives you the Serenade to Music and Why Fume and Fight and other things as well. So it's a better deal. And I don't know how many Previn versions of this symphony you're going to want. So this could be sort of an also-ran. We're going to get to his earlier one in a moment. But it's really good. I mean, it's really good. But now we have the last sort of three and a bit, 3.5, let's say, where we have performances that I think are really distinctive, things that stand out from this huge pack of Vaughan Williamses. First, Slatkin. Slatkin is such a fine conductor, and he is so good in this music. This is such a great Vaughan Williams cycle, with only one exception, I thought, which was the London Symphony, which was a little bit on the hasty side in spots. I thought it didn't have quite the guts that the piece needs. But boy, everywhere else he just nails it, and he does here. And this is a very distinctive performance. And the distinction comes out in the timings. Again, let's just assume for the sake of argument that he really hits the climaxes and gets the phrasing and the accentuation and the timbres, because he does. He does. But this is wonderful. The first movement is 10 minutes and 44 seconds. On the quick side, the scherzo, 4 minutes and 21, fleet and gossamer and marvelous. The romanza is 13 minutes. That is on the slow side. I mean, that's almost as slow as Haitink, although nobody is ever as slow as Haitink, fortunately. But the point is that, and the finale is 9 minutes and 14 seconds. That can go to over 11, as with Haitink, for example. So what do we get? We get a wonderful shape of the whole work, where the outer movements are comparatively bracing, and which is wonderful, and that romanza is the really beautiful, still center of the work, the true emotional core. And because the rest of the movements are done with such finesse and with such alacrity, Slatkin can slow down a little for the romanza and make it, the emotional climax of the symphony, and have it really tell. And that's smart. It's just smart conducting. It's smart interpretation. It's somebody who has thought about the music and presented it in a distinctive way. So this is one of the great ones. It is absolutely one of the great ones. I have no question or hesitation in saying that. Now, we have to talk about Adrian Bolt. Adrian Bolt did this thing a bunch of times. There is, of course, his earlier Decca cycle, which is due for re-release again on Australian Eloquence, so hang in there. But I have 2 of them here. I'm not going to talk about the Decca one, because I could talk about these. First, there is this live one on ICA Classics, which is really pretty splendid. It's a live performance with the BBC Symphony, and it's 34 minutes and 46 seconds long. He actually brings it in a little bit under the suggested timing of the composer. That's amazing. It's fascinating hearing it go at this tempo. This is coupled with a performance of the 6th, which is not very good. I mean, it's an okay live performance of, not really amazing distinctiveness. It's not terrible, but this 5th is really very cool. And the timings are 10 minutes and 20 seconds, 5 minutes and 15 for the scherzo. 9 minutes, he whips through the romanza. Some might think that's too quick. I don't. I mean, I understand it. I get the flow. The music has to flow. And then there's 10 minutes and 10 seconds for the finale. So it's a very beautiful performance, but it's surprisingly frisky. And for those of you who regard the work as, some sort of, almost quasi, Brucknerian, transfigurative, spiritual hog wallow of a piece, this will wake you up. And I think that's a good thing. But there's also Adrian Bolt in his stereo remake cycle with timings that are almost identical to this. It's still a quick performance. And I'll tell you what they are. Wait 1 second. So you know what it is, and you get a sense of it. It's not as much of a difference as you'd think, and I love this performance of the Fifth. There was a problem with it, which I don't hear in this remastering. Okay, so he's 11.5 minutes now for the first movement, same tempo for the scherzo, 10 minutes and 50 seconds, almost 2 minutes slower for the romanza, but he's still on the fast side. And then 9 minutes and 52 seconds, quicker in the finale. So, what's interesting is that you see that the performance, the timings, the interpretations, these points of detail can differ quite a bit, even with the same conductor from one performance to the next. But Bolt's way with the work is beautiful. The problem with this symphony was originally, when it was issued on CD, there was an electronic buzz or tone that permeated the entire recording, which made me absolutely crazy. And I wrote to EMI about it. I wrote to Peter Andre. I said, you got a problem. You got to fix it. What are you going to do? And they wrote back and said, oh, yeah, there's something there. And that was it. Peter Andre wrote me back saying, you're right. You saw that. No one's going to do anything about it. We don't care. That was that. But in the latest remastering, I don't notice it, or I don't notice it as badly. Let's put it that way. It doesn't seem to be a difficulty. And, this is a great cycle. And so these are interesting. And they're very interesting because they are also very close to the composer's own timings. So I think that's significant and worth considering. However, I got to pick one. And I would love to be able to pick one that you've never heard of, or a strange one, or something that's sort of radical or revolutionary, but I can't because the quality is what it is. And in this case, it's Previn with the LSO, his first one. There are things in this Vaughan Williams cycle which is also inconsistent. The mean ones, 4, 6, those didn't come off as well. 8 is kind of not fabulous. But 3 is amazing, and 5, this is amazing. The Sea Symphony is amazing. The Antarctica is amazing. The 9th is terrific. But this 5th is glorious, and it's glorious for all the right reasons. It is standard in tempo. That is the 12-minute first movement and third movement. The finale goes at exactly the pace it's supposed to. The scherzo is marvelous. Let me see if I can tell you what the details are here. Just because it's like the best one, we should have some sense of it. Wait a minute, number 5. Where would happen to number 5? It vanished. It's here, I know. Up there it is. Okay, 12 minutes and 49 seconds. A little slow in the first movement. 12 minutes and 15 seconds. Very perfect for the romanza. 11 minutes and 13 seconds. Also measured in the finale. And 5 minutes and 14 seconds for the scherzo. So this is 41 minutes and 53 seconds. That is a little bit on the slow side. So I'm not opposed to slow. But what's interesting about this is that when this performance was released, when these performances came out, back in the, whatever it was, the 60s or the late 60s or something, early 70s, when was the date of this? Oh, it doesn't say, and I don't want to find out. The point is, what people knew basically was Adrian Bolt and the swifter versions, and this slowed it down, but didn't lose anything of the flow or intensity of the music, because the playing is so beautiful. My goodness, the London Symphony Orchestra just nails this piece, and particularly the string section. It has that luminous quality, that fabulous, if you're going to do it this way, this is the way you have to do it, in my view. It has to have that hushed intensity and tangibility. The RCA engineers were really on target with this. It all went just the way it's supposed to go. The brass playing is gorgeous. The climaxes are big and majestic and glowing and burnished, but never vulgar. I mean, it's just glorious. It's an absolutely glorious performance of the Fifth. And so, I don't know exactly, how much of it was luck and how much of it was intention, but it's one of those days where everything went right, which made the interpretation, which might otherwise have seemed a little bit droopy or soft edge, which Previn often could be, let's face it. But it's not. It absolutely isn't. And that's why I say this was a symphony that obviously spoke to him. I mean, he recorded it 2 more times, but never better than here in his first version. So, I would go with Previn. I would go with Slatkin. I would definitely hear one of the Adrian Bolts. And the Bryden Thomson. And I'm just looking at this, this is like, oops. Here we have the Vaughan Williams Fifth Family. And it's a very happy family because most of these are very, very, very good. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you for joining me. Take care and go get your fifth.